Welcome back to The Short Game, a show about short video games, games that respect your time. I'm Reagan Kelly, and I'm joined by all my awesome co-hosts, Shane Kelly, my bro host. How you doing, Shane?
I'm doing real good. How about you?
I am feeling truly romantic this evening. And Lauren Nash, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm feeling very romantic, feeling very comic booky.
Yeah.
And Nate Heininger, how you doing, Nate?
I'm good. I guess I have a different feeling from this game than necessarily romance, but I'm glad to talk about it.
Yeah, actually, good point.
Are you feeling like an adult, Nate?
Yeah, I was going to say, there's a lot more.
I'm feeling glad that I'm not 25. Like that's...
Yeah.
There it is. That's it.
And we'll get into that more. But I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to talk about this game.
Yeah. And this week we're talking about a game called Florence. Florence came out on Valentine's Day on the iPhone, I think, or iOS. I think it's only on iOS at the moment. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so far.
Yeah, and it is sort of famously, if you read anything about this game, the first thing they will mention is that this is the first game from Mountains, which is the new development studio headed by Ken Wong, the lead designer of Monument Valley. And if you've listened to the show for a while, you know that we really loved Monument Valley. And so when I heard he was putting something new out and that it was short, I mean, very short, I was obviously interested.
Not to mention, it's published by Annapurna, who has brought us Gora Gora, What Remains of Edith Finch. Like, it's becoming a powerhouse for a publisher.
It really is. And it seems like it's becoming maybe even specifically the place where really awesome illustration in apps happens on iOS. Which, this is a game that is basically a vehicle for Ken Wong's cartooning and his illustration, and it's a really fantastically effective one because it takes it and it puts it in this interactive context that makes it just really easy to love, really easy to make to really draw you in to his illustrations.
And this game, illustrations are core to it because it really is an interactive graphic novel, interactive comic book for people who don't have their pretension hat on. And really the way you interact and play with it is a huge part of the story. So we're going to spoiler break super early because, at times you're doing something as simple as hitting the snooze button, but a lot of the other mechanics in the game, the way you play with there's no text. It's very much an illustration game. There's a couple words here and there, but they're mostly in a foreign language. Almost all of it's illustration. So we won't talk too much about the plot other than it's romantic. It's a love story. But really, if we talk more than just slice of life graphic novel, I think you're going to really miss out on something special to the game.
And I don't think I kind of touch that. It's a story about someone's growth, and
Yes.
I don't. So that'll be more after the story, or after the spoiler break. But yes, there's romance plays a heavy part in it, but I think the story is bigger than that. And so when we're sitting here saying it's a romantic game, it's a love story game, or whatever,
It is not a dating sim.
yeah, this
Very,
is not a
very
dating
good
sim.
point. Considering that this has been the month of dating sims for us, this is not another dating sim. I actually was kind of expecting more dating sim-y elements from it, based on the way they're marketing it. They really did sort of, put the romance front and center as part of the description of the game. And I mean, they released it on Valentine's Day, for God's sake.
Yeah.
So that's definitely core to it. But
I mean, there's a reason it's called Florence and not Florence and Krish,
right, absolutely.
because it's about Florence.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I don't want to discount the romance side, and obviously that's a big part of it and a big part of the marketing and everything. But if you're listening and saying oh, I don't want to play a love story game, there's more to it than that. And I think I really, really enjoyed it. I think we all really enjoyed it.
While we're talking kind of before the spoiler break about this and discussing kind of what is going to let you know if this is for you, I think the number one thing that's going to tell you is Florence something that you're really going to enjoy, is if you have an opinion on kind of what kind of comic books you're into, frankly, right? So if you are the sort of person who has ever picked up a comic book that kind of fits into that indie autobiographical diary comic genre or tiny subgenre, then this is 100% exactly for you.
Yeah, or if that's the sort of thing that you think you might be interested in, but you don't go to the graphic novel section at the back of the bookstore very often.
Everyone read Giant Days.
Absolutely.
What is that?
Giant Days is a comic about 3 girls who are having their first year at university in Britain, and they're all amazing. It's my favorite comic.
I will look it up, and I will link to it in the show notes.
The kind of format that I'm talking about is getting to be more and more common, and it's there's a lot of illustrators out there who have interesting personal stories to tell. The number one thing that kind of comes to mind that kind of started off this genre but doesn't really line up with what it is today would be Mouse, which was autobiographical and biographical, but the kind of subject matter that I'm referring to is really common in more independent, smaller stuff, and it's also really popular online, where you have typically little small, sometimes 4-panel, sometimes but often black and white, pure illustration, common in terms of like short stories, and it's very often relationship based.
One of the biggest comparisons I've seen from the comic world of this has been Blankets by Craig Thompson, which is
absolutely
a very thick story where there is a romance, but it's also about a coming of age story for a boy. This is much, much shorter, but if you're coming from the comic side, those are some touchstones for you. Polygon called this game a romantic WarioWare if you're coming from the game side. So
yeah, I do not come from the comic side. I have a lot less experience than you all, and to me, what was most intriguing about this game is not necessarily the story itself, but how you as a player, as a person, interact with the story, and how it's presented to you in the way that you're like kind of involved in it. And I think it's really, really unique and super slick and very, very light, but can also be really engaging. And they do a lot of things to get you involved in this story. And that's what stood out to me the most. And so even if you're not into like a romance slice of life story, I think you'll find this to be interesting, because I think there's a lot of things you can connect to, as well as it's just a really unique way of telling a story.
There's a lot of meaningful, metaphorical mechanics that are very rare, especially if you've seen those terrible motion comics they were selling a lot on iTunes back in the day.
God, those things.
Yeah, those are awful. This is very different. This is something that I don't think would work in a book form.
Not at all.
I think that it's made to be interactive.
Yeah,
and
it's really cleverly interactive throughout. Like it was constantly surprising me with clever, like, new modes of interaction. I'm sure we'll talk about some of our favorites post spoiler break, so that we don't, interfere with that experience for people who haven't played it yet. But it's full of these little designy, clever interactions that feel like they're hinting at a game mechanic, but really I don't think that this ever quite crosses over the line into like full-on game or puzzle. It's always just using fun tactile touchscreen interactions to kind of draw you into the panel of the comic, basically, kind of get you involved in the moment.
Yeah, I also love a game that recommends wearing headphones. I try to honor it every time. And it's all music and some, tactile sound effects, and it's great. I definitely recommend having headphones on. It adds to the experience.
The music is really lovely. I was on an airplane while I was checking this one out, and so of course I finished it all in a single sitting because I was sitting there for 13 hours.
Yeah, and honestly, it's a perfect game for a single sitting because you can complete it in under an hour.
Yeah, but I had my headphones on. It was like, and I felt like transported out of the airplane completely, and it was a really beautiful. And one of the things that I don't want to jump into any story elements, but music is an important aspect of the story as well, and so it's woven in beautifully. And there are scenes that I wish I don't know if we actually have the ability to do this on this episode, but I hope we do have the ability to drop in some of the music in this.
I'll do my best. I don't think they've released a soundtrack, but I kind of hope that they do, because it is just a bunch of really beautiful, I think, original compositions for this game. Mostly string instrument stuff, and it's really, really nice.
Now, it is original compositions, and it's performed. It's not a lot of video games. You're gonna have one person who makes it all on a computer with MIDI and stuff like that. They actually, in the credits, it actually runs through like the cello player, the violin player, the percussionist. Like they actually had a full orchestra, not a full orchestra, but live musicians perform and record the music for this game. And I think it's noticeable. It is a really great soundtrack.
Yeah, music is an important through line to it, so it's constantly in the foreground.
Yeah, you wouldn't expect a graphic novel, essentially an interactive graphic novel, to say, please put on your headphones. And so right when that popped up, I'm like, okay, yeah, of course. I love that. And it became a big part of it. So it's another example of we talk about this all the time, but a game that is taking everything that it's doing very seriously and trying to make the best experience for everything that it puts into it. And the music comes through.
I mean, even the little tiny things like on a romantic moment, everything is still except the blush on someone's cheek is animating very slightly. Ooh. And it just is so lovely and sweet, but it's not overbearing or cheesy. So it's those little touches that told me I was in good hands, and that let me really immerse myself in this for 30, 40 minutes. I
know we've talked about it already, but can we touch on the art style for a moment, which I think is just like so good. You mentioned the sort of slow blushes, and the animation of it is very, it's like low frames of animation, but like beautifully thought out animations.
Very smooth, but you can see the brush strokes.
Yeah.
In terms of the style, I would say it's somewhere in between like an American comic of today, like, following that tradition, and maybe with a little bit of Tintin.
That was actually my thought too. The two things I wrote down for like what I would describe the art style as like Quentin Blake, the guy who did all the illustrations for the like Roald Dahl books and everything.
Oh,
that guy's illustration style. I mean, that was always sort of very important to me when I was a kid.
It's the visible pencil,
right?
The line work is similar.
The line work,
tone is completely different. The line is very
but something about it sort of felt to me like a midpoint between Quentin Blake and like the Tintin comics.
Yeah, from the Tintin, it has that kind of large areas of color and a focus on like blocky color over gradients,
and really expressive but very minimally illustrated things like facial expression, facial features, and eyes. Like the eyes are all the sort of Tintin eyes, where it's really just a slight line, but it still manages to have an expression.
So there used to be a button in wireframe software for UX where you could take all your hard lines and convert them to sketch mode, where they suddenly look like they were in pencil line and had soft edges. Everything in the interface is soft, has that pencil line quality. It's very well crafted.
Yeah, it looks illustrated, like hand illustrated, although I'm sure a lot of it's computer designed or computer illustrated.
Someone should take basically every source file in iOS and hit that button, so that everything looks like this.
Yes.
That would be going back to iOS 7, Shane.
I want them to do that.
It would be hard to know what was clickable, but man, I would be much happier.
Man.
Until I couldn't use the software.
Well, how much more can we say about this game before we start transitioning into spoiler
We can talk
territory?
a little bit about the team behind it. Other than Ken Wong, who we've mentioned, and he's the lead designer he's the creative director from Monument Valley. He brought on a team. I think this really is, so we've got him as the creative director. We have a producer and two programmers, and that's the entire team that made this. The producer she's made a lot of stuff that I've never heard of. Let me just put it that way. A lot of stuff that I never played.
But she also worked on To Be or Not to Be by Ryan North.
Oh, I could see a bit of a through line there.
Did she?
Mm-hmm.
What's her name? Because I don't think we said it.
It's Camina Vincent.
Did we cover that one for this show?
We have not covered that on the show.
Oh man, why haven't we
should've.
covered that on this show? That game is phenomenal.
Yeah, it works great. Because it's a book and not a game.
Well, no, there's an
Yeah.
iOS version that is excellent, so that makes it a game.
I was gonna say let's have that conversation now. And while we're at it, what is art? I would love to have that conversation right now.
It depends on what the definition of is.
Are robots people? Discuss.
Yeah, so the other two, we've got the programmer and lead programmer Sam Crisp and Tony Kokzuli. Please tell me I pronounced Kokzuli right. No, it's definitely Koklozi.
Koklozi,
yeah. And
Electrifying.
the two of them seem interesting. The thing that interested me the most when I was kind of just reviewing who's involved was Sam Crisp's work on something called Movement Study 1. And having clicked through and seen that, it looks like a little bit of the DNA of that went into this. It looks like a kind of a short adventure game about just some people hanging around in Melbourne, which there's definitely some DNA of that. One of my favorite segments of this game is all about just what can you do if you're hanging around Melbourne.
At the same time, their lead program was the lead dev on Cuphead. So
Yeah.
I've none of that as in the artist, but
he can do programming that makes illustrations look like they're a video game, or makes video games look like they're
That's
illustrations, or both. It's getting real hard not to talk about all my feelings about this story. Can we?
It is.
Can we move around to this.
I think we were ready to go into spoiler.
I think
we're
10
minutes ago.
Yeah. I don't think we can hold off talking about the meat of this experience any longer, the story of Florence. And the game is primarily a story, or it's a really interesting, interactive way to deliver a story. But we don't want to spoil that story, so we're going to roll towards our spoiler break. Before we do, first off, thank you, listener, for joining us. If you are very spoiler sensitive or you haven't played Florence yet, this would be a good time to hop off and go play it. You're probably listening to this episode on an iPhone right now, aren't you? You can pop over to the App Store and download this game for $2.99, which I think is a really fair price for something so artfully created. It's a fairly large download. I'll warn you, all of that exquisite music takes up a lot of space on your device for something that is as short an experience as this. I was very surprised to see that it's a little over 1.2 gigabytes, so prepare yourself for that. But otherwise, pop over to the App Store, download Florence, and meet us back here post-spoiler break, where we'll be discussing our reactions to the story. I have been your host, Reagan Kelly. You can find me on Twitter at ReaganK, and you can find our show on the web at www.theshortgame.net or on Twitter at _shortgame. Shane, where can people find you?
You can find me on the internet at 8BitShane.
And Laura, where can people find you?
you can also find me on Twitter at Laura J. Nash.
And Nate, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at NateSTL. And not only did we love this game, but we also love iTunes reviews. So
and you. I thought you were going to say we also love you, but
We love
that
all
goes
our
hand in
listeners,
hand.
but there are certain listeners who we love more.
There are listeners that are more equal than others, and those are the ones that have left us iTunes reviews. And so I want to take this moment to give a shout out to two people who recently did. Greg 12345. I'm going off their iTunes review name here. Among a lot of very nice things, they said, "This show makes me smile." Greg, you make us smile. And the other one was written
Thank you,
by
Greg.
metal _butterfly. Said some very nice things. Headline: These guys are cool. No, metal butterfly, you're the one that's cool. Thank you for writing us a review. If you would like your name and your headline read back to you on the podcast, leave us a review. We deeply appreciate it.
If you actually think about a metal butterfly, that is pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And a Greg12345, Greg12345 is also pretty cool. As well as all of those who have left us reviews in the past. We really, really do appreciate it. It helps us a lot, but also, it's just great to hear from you. And this is a way that's kind of beneficial to us and fun. So thank you to you two, and thank you to those in the future.
And thank you, listeners, for joining us. Here it is, your spoiler break.
The first thing that you'll see and hear when you open up Florence is the first chapter of the first act, and the game is split into many very small chapters that take some of them maybe 1 or 2 minutes. The first thing you'll see is the first chapter called Adult Life, which is going to be familiar to anybody. It's just Florence Yo, who's 25 years old, lives in Melbourne. She's going through her day, and it starts off with just hitting snooze on her alarm clock, brushing her teeth, and every activity that you do in your typical day, kind of your 9 to 5, is represented here. From Instagramming on the train to working on a spreadsheet at work, and kind of going through the motions. Literally, you're going through the motions of her life. And what is really great about this is it's a super identifiable moment, but it connects you tangibly with this character because you are her doing every little minute interaction in her day. And it sets the tone for the rest of the game. But in this first act, the first 3 chapters, we just sort of establish who is Florence, because Florence is truly the main character, obviously the title character. And then at the very end of it, we introduce in a chapter called Music, she's introduced to the romantic interest of the story.
And I think one of my favorite things about this opening section is that the drudgery isn't boring per se, but it does kind of feel like busy work. It's a lot of tapping, a lot of just like scrolling through Instagram on the train, talking to your mom, brushing your teeth, eating toast. It's like, doing accounting work. It doesn't really feel like she's not living her best life. And very relatable. It's a game where the drudgery doesn't feel necessarily like the most exciting mechanics in the world, but you also feel like, oh, it's not supposed to be. Something is coming.
Yeah.
And so when the love interest comes in, it really is a sweeping change. You can even go back and you can see where it's a little different, where she looks through memories of doing art, and it feels a little more interesting when you're doing those sections. You know that there's something buried in Florence, which I love.
I thought there was something really relatable about her just as a character. She seems introverted. She clearly has friends because of her Instagram feed, but it seems like they are sort of at a distance. It's something that she only ever really interacts with through her phone. And she's kind of, you get the vibe that she's like this, I think she's kind of a late bloomer, like she's a kind of quiet person who has a lot. I mean, like you said, Laura, she has something within her that is more than what we're seeing in these opening, ride the train to work, talk to mom on the phone irritatedly, and answer questions about why you don't have a boyfriend yet kind of stuff.
I found one thing relatable about her, and that is that she's a very smart and organized person, but she has a closet in her house that just opening the door is dangerous because everything just sort of falls out and traps her underneath a pile of garbage. So I mean, and that's me also.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I live in filth, but I have. I did relate because I think often the stories you get told about ladies are like ladies who are perfect or ladies who have are just completely hot messes and have nothing worked out. And she's just kind of living a boring, quiet life, a life of quiet desperation. I really enjoyed getting to see her. There's nothing wrong with her life. It's just not great.
Yeah.
It's an adult life.
Well,
she's definitely adulting. Yeah.
Also, just from a gameplay side, I think it's a pretty good level 1-1. The first things you're doing, not that the game gets much more complicated, but it really is super simple. There's no instructions ever. It never says pick this up. I mean, there's kind of these little gray circles that'll appear on the screen that kind of indicate maybe how your finger is supposed to move. But for the most part, it's just like, oh, there's a toothbrush in the middle of the screen. You tap it and you start moving it back and forth like you do a toothbrush, and a blue bar starts to fill up. And it sort of grows from there. And they're boring, and it serves a purpose because they're boring activities, but they also set you up for later in the game when things get a little bit more complicated and you have to get a little bit more involved on the screen.
Did anybody else find the collectibles inventory a little hard to manage right off the bat?
Yeah, it's very difficult. On all the side quests and, all that was pretty complicated.
Yeah, the crafting system.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
These are jokes for people who haven't played the game and didn't listen to us.
Oh, sorry, I was flashing over to Monster Hunter.
Well, it's the standard thing with your dryness. I was like, wait, did I miss a collectible thing? And I'm like, wait, no, hold on.
Yes, well, speaking of crafting, there's an early scene in chapter 2 that I think kind of sets up, like, so you see Florence as this sort of office lady who exists only in the moments where she's like traveling between work and home and flipping through photos on her phone, and then we immediately jump to some mementos from her past fall out of her closet, and we jump to seeing Florence as a 7-year-old making art. And suddenly the game is in color. I mean, there's some color, but like Florence's world in the initial chapter is mostly gray, whereas suddenly young Florence exists in a world of color, and she's doing these. It's got a really cute little system that lets you do art as Florence and make a little sailboat and a butterfly.
Yeah, you stamp these swatches onto the sailboats and the butterfly, and personal sidetrack, I got really excited because this whole put a swatch on, rotate, and fill a space was my first game design for Hannah Montana Designer Dreams. And,
available online. Get it now on.
If you want to go to a shady off-brand site that'll make you download a Flash file, yes, available online.
Sorry, no, Laura, I really want to play Hannah Montana Designer Dreams now. Your first game work. It sounds, I think it's
actually really fun, and the clothes are so tacky. There's like instead of in this game you're doing classy prints of like hearts and stars and things for a 7-year-old. When I was doing it, it was like sequins and cheetah print and camouflage. It was like No Doubt threw up on a game, and I was very excited to build it.
That sounds like a blast, actually. And I mean, it really works here. It's a really nice little way to do art without requiring you, the player, to be artistic, but you get to put a little bit of your design sense into these cute little 7-year-old creations. And what I love about it is that one of these becomes a bit of a through line. Florence makes this butterfly art as a 7-year-old and then finds it again in her closet. And at least at this stage, she kind of just looks at it, right? It doesn't it's not a revelation to her yet, but you can see that it kind of reminds her of something about herself that she hadn't exactly forgotten, but that she literally put away in the closet, in order to be an adult.
Yeah, I think we all have those, those hobbies, those things that you I like my parents dropped a whole box of stuff from my childhood, and I was really into karate when I was like 8, and I have all these karate trophies. Wow. Yeah, it's pretty funny, actually. If you know me now, it's like, that's so far from...
We learn a lot about you on this show, a ska band and karate.
Yeah. Infinite depths. Yeah, and not that I would ever get back into karate, but you look at that stuff and you're like, oh, that was a big part of my life for a while.
I think it probably says something about me that all the shit I was into, I'm still into.
I did a tournament and I got kicked in the face and started crying, and I never went back. So.
Oh, Nate,
buddy,
you're not supposed to kick in the face. That's like you're not supposed to. Do
That's a rule. Is that a rule? Yeah. Is this true? You're not supposed to get kicked in the face.
I have glasses. I have glasses. Okay, I have giant glasses.
I'm so delighted that the little it's literally the chapter called Memories, and all we've done is sit there and be like, when I was a young lad, when I was a young game designer,
when I was a young warthog.
When I was a young warthog, yeah, it's I don't know. This game trudged up a lot of emotions. Maybe because I dated several cellists, but
Really?
yeah, it was a weird theme.
It really seems like this game is, I mean, it's telling a specific story about a specific person, but it seems like a series of things trying to remind you of like, hey, you've been in a relationship, right? Presumably. Do you remember what this part felt like? Do you remember what this other part felt like? What about this last
remember
part?
in Life is Strange, really early on in that game, if you played it, there's that scene where main character of Life is Strange walks out into the school hall, puts on her headphones, and like some indie rock song is playing, and it's just like all the kids in school are walking around, and it felt like a tailored, specific thing to make you feel nostalgic about a certain time of your life. I feel like that's what this game does, but for like, I think if you're over the age of 25, or not even necessarily that, you've probably experienced a lot of things that Florence goes through in this game. Maybe not the whole through line that she goes through, the exact experience, but you can connect to individual moments like constantly in this game that pull you into your own life experience. I think that's part of the reason why there's no dialogue, why like you can put yourself into it very, very easily.
Let's talk about the second act. In the second act, she's walking, at the end of the first act, she's walking through a park, or I guess she's on her way to and from work, and she hears beautiful music, beautiful cello being played. And she sees the most beautiful boy playing the most beautiful...
And she floats in the air.
Oh, that was very cute.
She floats along. She's carried along. I think, so what is it? She's I think it was really cute. Like her phone dies, and so she has to take her headphones out. And suddenly she's connected to the world around her, and that's when she hears this beautiful music. And she floats along until she sees this beautiful, scruffy-looking boy playing the cello.
Busking.
And then she is hit by a bus.
Wait, is she? I forgot about that.
No, she's on her bike. She's hit by a car or something.
She falls off.
There's a crash.
I think she sees him.
Chapter 4, crash.
Yeah, I think she sees him, and she like literally double takes and crashes her bike.
Oh,
like I think it's more like I didn't. But yeah, and you literally have to turn
so that's the
and get things in
she's seen him.
focus.
She's seen him before, but now
she rubbernecks and is like, "Damn, he's hot."
She sees him walking around with his like little cello case strapped to his back, and her head turns a little too far, and
love.
She is struck by. Now I'm opening up the app to see what it was again. There's a cool interaction where there's like multiple dials that you have to dial in to like focus on things, and you focus obviously on the wrong thing, looking at Krish's butt. And
well, yeah, it's fun because you're dazed, like you fell, and this is where like the gameplay mechanic fits with what actually happened. Is like you're blurry and you're trying to figure out what's going on, and so you have to align the dials, and it focuses in on Krish, and then from there, romance blossoms, right? You start to have these conversations, which I think to me was the one that really stood out to me the most in this whole game was the conversation mechanic. When you first start talking to Krish, from his side, a little speech bubble comes up, and then for you have to actually put together a puzzle, like literally a puzzle, be like 3 to like 10 different pieces that form your own speech bubble. So you put together that speech bubble, and then she responds, and then he responds, and then as you talk to him more, the puzzle gets simpler and simpler and simpler, starting with a lot of pieces all the way down to where it's 3 pieces that are basically already aligned, and you just have to slide them into the speech bubble. And it's super nuanced, and it's like it is the feeling of conversation getting easier with somebody as you get to know them, and as you start to become involved with that person. You can just talk to them about anything and everything. Yeah. You're not being as when you're first starting to get to know someone, especially if it's something that's like romantic, everything is like a calculated thing, right? Like, what do I say next? What do I say? What do I say? What do I say? It just evolves into like you're just talking. It's really subtle, and and really beautiful. It's a really cool way to handle it.
I love that mechanic is a bit of a through line through the game, and that they bring it up again when Florence and Krish are having fights later in the game when they're starting to drift apart. When they're fighting, you're trying to get a word in, right? You're trying to win the argument, and the little puzzle pieces become simpler to put together. But in a way, also, it seems like that kind of like carelessness, right? Like when you're having a heated argument or a heated conversation with somebody, you may not really be thinking about what you're saying, and so the same is true for Florence here. When you're dragging her little speech bubble pieces together into a little puzzle, they're just a couple of pieces, and Florence is not giving deep thought to what she's doing. She's throwing together something maybe to cut or to wound. It's really neat how that mechanic is used again in a way that makes that. I didn't, as the player, I was like, I don't want to put these pieces together because I don't want them
I don't want to fight.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's really lovely that not only are these conversation bubbles used to change the pace and that feeling of clicking with somebody, but also it's kind of mini combat. I mean, the story's super linear. It's not like if you decide that you're going to rapid fire put together these pieces and fire back in an argument that magically you're going to not break up. There's no way to, win this game by having a better fight, just as that's not how you win a relationship, by talking faster. But at the same time, you do get a little bit of choice. You get to decide how much you're going to, if you're going to lay back and take it and let him talk more and just fight back when you want. You can kind of control how you fight, which I find really, it's not charming, but it's very meaningful. And another time they let you make choices is when you're moving in with him. You can decide what you keep and what you give away. You get to decide how you're moving in with somebody.
That is absolutely my favorite. I think that's the strongest interaction in the game, because that's the one moment where we don't see Krish and Florence. They're not on screen. Instead, we're seeing their apartment, their environment, and they're moving in together. And it's basically asking you to go through that sort of negotiation that you have to do when you move in with somebody, where you decide, okay, we now have 2 toasters. Which toaster do we keep, mine or yours? Little stuff like that, all the way up to like, well, I guess it's only fair that I have a picture of his family up next to mine, but that means that I have to get rid of this cool thing on my shelf. Or, we only have space for so many pairs of shoes. Which of my pairs of shoes do I want to put into storage? And so you're presented with several different little scenes, mostly just a room or a wall or a shelf, and you have to go through it and decide, like, what do I keep of mine? What of Krish's do we put up in the house? And what do we put away where we're not going to see it?
I really agree with you. I think this is one of the best interactions in the game. One of 2 really, really good interactions. And it's because this is one of really only 2 places in the game where you're making choices that are meaningful. A lot of the interactions are things that you do that kind of move the story forward or connect you with the characters, like, brushing your teeth. But in this moment, and in the creation of the butterfly and the sailboat, well, really the butterfly, you are making a choice that is going to come back to you in a meaningful way later on in the story. You are here when you decide where you're putting things away, and unpacking things onto the shelves. That the choices that you make kind of unconsciously there have a meaning when later you're having to pack to move away. And with the butterfly, you are drawing and building this, just little colorful blob, in my case. But the decisions that you made there that led to the colorful blob that you have are, come back to you because you're presented with that butterfly in a meaningful way again in the future. And I think that's what makes those 2 elements the most interesting to me. I would really like to see... I love places where, when we talk in games about meaningful choices, a lot of times we're talking about, oh well, you know, if it's a meaningful choice because if you pick the strength-based class, then you're locked out of the dexterity-based classes later on for multi-classing. That's the kind of meaningful choices that we talk about sometimes. But this is meaningful in that, you know, it has emotional weight that you aren't prepared for at the start. Like, it presents you with these tiny choices that you might not even realize are choices, and then when they come back to you, they're presented with actual story meaning, with actual emotion attached to them, and it's more emotional for you because of that.
Yeah, and a couple things about that. It's like, it's not meaningful because it changes anything in the story. It's just meaningful because it reminds you that you're present in the story, I think, you know? And it's not like you know, this is not like Telltale meaningful choices where, you know, it tells you put Krish's skateboard into storage and it pops something and Krish will remember that.
Krish, yeah,
it's nothing like that. It's like it doesn't have like a plot relevance, or like it doesn't have like a weight in the story exactly.
You're not unlocking the true ending.
Yeah, it just has a personal. It has on some level. I don't think you can help but have some kind of personal meaning to when you make those choices.
No, you guys, I picked the exact right stuff, and I got the good ending with Krish.
Yeah, there you go.
I got married and famous.
Perfect. Well, the developers have mentioned Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind as one of their touch points while they're working on the story. And to me, what this mechanic, this revisiting of, you know, moving out, it's such a short game, but it manages to give us something really concrete to look back at. When you made that decision to keep the picture next to it, or to get rid of it, or to get rid of something you liked with a cricket bat. And then when you put that cricket bat,
Pretty sure it's a bat.
piece of sports equipment back into the box, you're not only moving him out, but you're remembering, oh, I sacrificed part of me to let him in. You know, it just gives it a lot more oomph than a click here to put it away. Especially the fact that you have to put it in a box called storage. It's just a lot sadder. I mean, moving out and breaking up is depressing enough, but knowing that you made those choices for a reason, presumably, even if it was, I don't like the color blue, whatever reason it is will come back.
Yeah. So we've kind of discussed, I think, really the entire middle and meat of the main part of this game, which is Florence and Krish getting together, and then Florence and Krish breaking up. There is some interesting stuff, though, in the nature of their relationship. Krish starts going to the Academy of Music, so you see sort of the sacrifices, a relationship makes or takes when somebody has to commit themselves really, really heavily to something like that. And all the while, Florence is starting to work on her painting, but she has to basically give that up. It seems to maybe support them while Krish is in the Academy of Music, which leads to, when they break up, after another period of sort of returning to the banality of her former life, Florence gets back into painting. And the game gets a little... it's the only part that, like, it almost felt... like you're happy for Florence, but it was a little strange to me because she essentially becomes like a very successful artist at the end, which is great. But I'd love to talk to you guys like what you got from that.
Well, I don't know. I think like the whole sort of, I guess, theme to me of the story was that like Florence was in this sort of state of like arrested personal development, or emotional or artistic development, partly just because she had she'd flown maybe too quickly into this lifestyle of like the accountant office lady that really wasn't ultimately what suited her, and Krish like woke her up. And so I think really this isn't a game about her being in love with Krish, it's about her like being in love with being an artist, not specifically a visual artist, but like, being in love with, I think it's easy in some cases and to like meet someone who embodies something that you want to be and think that you love them, but actually what you really love is like what they inspire in you. And I think that's kind of the story of Florence, is like she ultimately isn't suited to be with Krish, but he wakes her up to something that was in there all along since she was 7, this artistic inner life she has that she's buried in her closet. And once, even with Krish out of her life, she realizes that hasn't left, it's not gone. And I don't know, I could see that, like, I was a little bit like, it's a very tidy ending for her to suddenly find painting again after Krish leaves, and suddenly be not only just painting in her spare time as an office lady, but suddenly showing in galleries, and her mom is okay with it now, and everything is coming up roses. But I don't know. I'm glad it ended that way. I thought it was like a lovely,
it's a nice ending
story.
But who in your life gets to say what are your dreams, but the person you're dating? It's a real cheeseball thing. Like, it's not like your casual friends are going to ask you over nachos.
Yeah.
So I think it's being honest with herself about actually saying she has a dream that's not living in an office. Because everyone else, you say, well, I have a great job, and you don't want to get that deep. So
right.
This game is so empathetic. It's asking you to empathize with it. And so it is a little tidy, but to me, I guess my headcanon is that she had a really good Etsy shop. And
I don't think it's even headcanon. Like, it shows her webpage as one
like
of
she's
the
got a
interactions.
website selling art. Like, she has a gallery, but like it's not like she's a fine art gallery.
But it starts with just like she's selling her stuff online, and it's the kind of very decorative, cute, like, you see her art, and essentially it's like very nice little prints of flowers, and it's background stuff in the game. The game doesn't have to impress you with Florence's art, but it's like it does
you
have
put
that
it up
kind
in
of
your
feeling
house.
of like, well,
Yeah,
that's
that
very
shit
nice,
sells, bro.
That looks nice. That'll sell on Etsy.
I think it's also just supposed to be representative
Right.
of like
Absolutely.
her art. It's not necessarily like this is literally she does flowers. Yeah.
We're not here to judge Florence's art.
Yeah, you can see her art to the level of detail that you can see her face, which is like 3 lines.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
But it's lovely. I really liked the ending quite a lot. And
Yeah,
yeah,
me too.
I've got to say, like, I'm surprised to hear some cynical notes here at the ending, because to me it had such a beautiful, perfect ending. Florence, we all take something from every relationship that we have, whether it goes well or ill. That's, I think, the message of this, and that it also shows that she's a strong person who doesn't need a man in her life to find happiness. I think that's a beautiful sentiment as well, especially as unexpected as it is in something as romantic as this story is. So honestly, yeah, I really thought the ending was lovely.
yeah, I really loved the moment towards the end when she's leaving her office job, and it uses that packing up mechanic one more time as she's packing up her desk, and she finds under her keyboard a picture of Krish and her together in happier times, or not happier times really, but in other times. And you can see her just sort of smile at it and put it away in her box. She's carrying that with her forward. She's no longer heartbroken over it. She's not rejecting the past. She's not shredding every photo of Krish. But she's now moving on. I just thought it was like really nice. And I was like expecting, and honestly kind of, I don't know if I was dreading exactly, but I was kind of expecting the scene in the gallery where she's beginning to show her art. I was like, Krish is going to be here.
I thought the same thing.
But it doesn't pull that card, which I think would have been a little easy. It's a moment of like, she's there with her mom, and she's like meeting friends, and she's showing her art, and it's a successful moment, and it's not about that part of her past. It's about the woman she's become.
Yeah. One more of those meaningful choices coming back to you is whether or not you answered all your mom's calls.
Yeah, I didn't mean exactly this. If it came off as cynical, I guess more I was surprised at how, as Reagan put it, like tidy the ending was. I guess I am maybe cynical to like these types of stories where you just expect it to end not like almost perfect for the person, right? So that surprised me. But I do see the sort of the point that she grew from the relationship with Christian, while it ended bad for them two in that moment. Big picture, it's a great experience and a defining part of her life. Because probably if she, you never know, but if her and Chris hadn't had their time together, she may or may not have gotten back into painting, and may or may not have become this type of successful. So I was just surprised how quickly it seems to happen and how tidy it is. But I do think it serves the bigger purpose of the message that the game is trying to get across.
Yeah, the romance novel genre has the terms happily ever after and happy for now, to the point that people even abbreviate them when talking about them. Hi, Jenny, if you listen. Our friend reps romance novel, and that's why I know this. But I am really happy that the love of her life was her art and it's fine. It's not happy or sad. It just is.
Mm-hmm.
Not him, but she'll be better for it.
And it does seem to happen relatively, we don't know what the rest of her life looks like, but we do probably know that her relationship with Chris is a major factor in what led her to rediscovering her art. But we don't necessarily know that that's the end of her romantic life.
Oh no,
right?
No.
We're just seeing that window into it, and so who knows where she goes next? Because she seems to be about the same age when that all starts happening. There's not a aging moment where she looks like a 50-year-old woman.
Yeah, I think this takes place maybe over the course of a couple of years.
Yeah, it's all still the same sort of time. So we don't know. Maybe in Florence too.
Oh God,
she meets someone else and they get married, or whatever. But it doesn't really matter.
I mean, with all that said, one of the images that's going to stick with me the most is when when it's over, you do a puzzle of the two of them in bed, and you realize that they're facing opposite directions and the puzzle pieces do not fit together.
Yeah.
And it is just one of the most beautiful moments I've had in kind of games as metaphor.
And the one that was similar to that too, where it's them hugging, and it's in the middle of them fighting. The fight's been going on, and it's a picture of them hugging, and you're trying to put it back together, but the pieces keep drifting apart really, really slowly, and it's really, really, really hard to actually put it back together.
That was beautiful.
And it's just it's a perfect metaphor. It's it's been splintered, they're drifting apart, and you can struggle and try to put it back together, but ultimately that drift has already happened, and it's very unlikely that perfect image of them together will ever be that way again. And there's so many of those in this game, that these little tight mechanics with just your finger tapping or dragging on something on a screen that is representative, that makes you feel something way more than what's actually happening on the screen. And I think that's the biggest success of this game. The conversations, what we just discussed, the packing things away. I think that's what sticks with you from this game. The story itself is it's good. It serves the purpose, but it's kind of a atypical or a typical sort of progression of a romance, right? Hook up, everything's great, it falls apart, and you become a new person from it. That's not new, but the way that they tell it in this game I think is very unique and very successful, and ultimately what makes this game stand out. Right?
Yeah, right. Let's wrap.
Let's wrap.
We all had so many feelings.
Many feelings. I really think this is a promising example of I hope that more comics creators take a look at digital platforms and do something clever with them. I mean, I remember years and years ago, Scott McCloud had this whole idea about infinite canvas comics, and he thought, now that we're not confined to a page, what can comics do with that infinite space and being able to arrange panels in a way that isn't necessarily top to bottom, left to right. How can we do that? And I've seen surprisingly, it's been a decade since then, and I've seen surprisingly little done with that idea. This isn't quite that same idea, but it's an idea of like, what can we do with comic art in a digital medium where we're, now unmoored from like the realities of having to print something on dead trees. And this is a beautiful expression of that. And I really hope we see more stuff like this, telling more personal, interesting stories. And I'm really glad we played it for the show. We already did all of our admin up top before the spoiler break. So unless anybody else has any last thoughts to leave us with?
I do. I just want to congratulate us on, once again, having an episode that is longer than the game that we played.
Probably true. Depending on how...
That's the short game way.
Well, that's the way we do it on the short game. So, listener, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the short game.